Welcome back to the deep dive. Sometimes it feels like every day brings another scientific breakthrough, and it's exciting, but it can also be like, whoa, how do we even keep up with it all?
That's a lot.
Yeah. So, today we're doing what we do best. We're taking a deep dive into some fascinating ideas about the universe and our place in it.
Sounds good.
You've shared some really thought-provoking sources with us, and honestly, I'm ready to have my mind blown.
Well, it seems like you've been exploring the fringes of theoretical physics,
A little bit.
thinking about things like higher dimensions, consciousness, and maybe even time travel. It's pretty exciting stuff.
It is exciting. One of the sources talks about this unified resonance framework, or URF, and at first I was like, oh boy, this sounds intimidating, like something only a physicist could understand.
Right.
But then I realized it's really about connecting the dots between things we already know from different fields, like how the principles behind sound waves might apply to the way energy moves through the universe.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. The URF isn't about creating entirely new theories. It's more about finding a new lens to look through what we already know.
Oh,
Like imagine you have a box full of puzzle pieces and you've been trying to fit them together in a certain way.
okay.
The URF is like finding a new picture on the box that shows you a completely different way to assemble the puzzle.
Okay, I like that analogy. So
Okay.
instead of focusing on individual pieces, we're looking for the underlying pattern that connects them all.
Exactly.
But how does this framework actually work? What are the key principles?
Well, the core idea is that everything vibrates.
Hmm.
Atoms, planets, galaxies, maybe even consciousness itself.
Whoa.
And these vibrations interact through resonance.
Okay.
Kind of like how a tuning fork can make another tuning fork vibrate without even touching it.
Oh, that's cool. So they're saying that the universe is like one giant symphony with all these different vibrations creating this complex harmony. I can sort of picture that, but how does that explain things like dark energy
Right.
or the expansion of the universe?
Well, remember how we talked about looking for a new pattern in the puzzle pieces?
Yeah.
The URF suggests that dark energy, which seems to be pushing the universe apart, might not be a mysterious force,
Okay.
but rather a result of resonant interactions happening on a cosmic scale. It's like the combined vibrations of everything in the universe are creating this outward pressure.
Wow. That's a pretty radical shift in perspective. And it makes you wonder, if everything is vibrating, does that mean we could potentially manipulate those vibrations?
Yeah.
Could we use resonance to create new technologies or
Wow.
even influence consciousness itself?
Those are some big questions, and the source does hint at some pretty mind-blowing possibilities.
Like what?
For example, they suggest that if consciousness is indeed a resonance phenomenon, we might be able to develop technologies that can directly interact with and influence brainwave patterns,
Okay.
potentially leading to breakthroughs in treating neurological disorders
Right.
or even enhancing cognitive abilities.
Okay, now things are getting really interesting. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we dive into those possibilities, let's talk about the evidence. What kind of scientific observations support this unified resonance framework?
Well, one of the most compelling pieces of evidence comes from quantum physics.
Okay.
Remember the Casimir effect, where two uncharged plates are attracted to each other in a vacuum?
I think so.
That's been experimentally verified, and it demonstrates the existence of quantum fields which are constantly fluctuating and interacting.
Right, I remember reading about that. So they're saying those quantum fluctuations could be evidence of resonant interactions happening at the most fundamental level of reality.
Exactly. And it's not just quantum physics. The source also draws upon observations from cosmology,
Okay.
like the cosmic microwave background radiation, which is thought to be leftover energy from the Big Bang.
Right.
They suggest that the patterns we see in this radiation could be explained by resonant interactions happening in the early universe.
So they're connecting evidence from the tiniest particles to the largest structures in the universe. It's a pretty ambitious framework. But there's another concept that really caught my attention, the idea that the Van Allen radiation belts, which surround Earth,
Right.
could be more than just a barrier to high-energy electrons.
Yes, that's where things start to get especially mind-bending.
Okay.
The source proposes viewing the Van Allen belts as a kind of higher dimensional boundary, perhaps even a point where our 4D reality intersects with a 5D world.
Okay.
They even acknowledge this might seem like a fringe idea,
Right.
but they encourage us to keep an open mind and see where it leads.
Okay, a 5D world. I'm definitely going to need some help wrapping my head around that. I'm familiar with the idea of 3 spatial dimensions plus time.
Sure.
But how do we even begin to imagine a 5th dimension?
It's definitely a challenge to visualize,
Mhm.
but one way to think about it is to consider the limitations of our current perspective.
Okay.
Imagine a flatworm living on a 2D surface.
Okay.
You can only perceive length and width, not height. To that flatworm, a 3D object passing through its world would appear as a series of disconnected shapes.
So are you saying we're like those flatworms unable to perceive the full reality of higher dimensions?
Exactly. Our brains are wired to process information from a 3D perspective.
Okay.
So it's difficult for us to intuitively grasp what a higher dimension would look like or how it would interact with our world. But that doesn't mean it can't exist.
So how do the Van Allen belts fit into all of this? What makes them a potential gateway to a 5D reality?
Well, the source highlights the recent discovery of a sharp boundary at the inner edge of the outer Van Allen belt.
Mm.
This boundary acts like an impenetrable barrier to high-energy electrons.
Okay, so they're not just talking about the Van Allen belts as a concept.
Right.
They're pointing to specific scientific observations.
Right. They're saying that this barrier is so sharply defined and so effective at blocking these electrons that it suggests something more than just a typical physical phenomenon. They propose that this barrier could represent a more stable region of a higher dimensional interface,
Okay.
perhaps even a point where our 4D reality intersects with the 5D realm.
Okay, I'm trying to keep up. So they're suggesting that this boundary in the Van Allen belts could be like a crack in the matrix, a glimpse into a hidden dimension.
That's a great analogy. And it raises the question, if these higher dimensions do exist, why haven't we detected them directly?
Right.
Well, this source, which draws upon something called the IIT HoloQFT 5D brain world model, might have an explanation.
Okay, that's a mouthful. Can you break down that alphabet soup of acronyms for us?
Of course.
Right.
It sounds complicated, but it's really about combining some pretty amazing ideas.
Okay.
IIT refers to Integrated Information Theory, which attempts to explain how consciousness arises from the complex interactions in our brains.
Okay.
Holo refers to the holographic principle, the idea that our 3D universe might be like a projection of information encoded on a 2D surface. And QFT, well, that's quantum field theory, which we discussed earlier.
So this model brings together ideas from consciousness holography and quantum physics to describe a 5D reality where our 4D world is embedded.
You got it. And they suggest that this 5D reality might be so fundamentally different from our own
Okay.
that our current scientific instruments are simply not equipped to detect it directly.
It's mind-boggling to think about. But if this is true, is there any way we could ever interact with or even detect these higher dimensions?
The source proposes that one way we might interact with these higher dimensions is through something called closed time-like curves, or CTCs for short.
Okay, CTCs. That sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
It might sound like science fiction, but CTCs are a theoretical concept in physics that describe paths through space-time that loop back on themselves, essentially allowing for time travel.
Wait, time travel? Are they saying that time travel could be the key to accessing higher dimensions?
That's what they seem to be suggesting. The idea is that instead of traveling through vast distances in 3D space,
Right.
which would be incredibly time-consuming and energy-intensive,
Right.
advanced civilizations might be using CTCs to travel through higher dimensions, essentially taking shortcuts through space-time.
So instead of building faster-than-light spaceships, we should be focusing on building time machines. That's a pretty wild concept.
It is a radical idea, and it's important to remember that this is all highly speculative and based on a lot of theoretical physics.
Yeah.
But it's thought-provoking to consider the possibility that what we perceive as impossible, based on our limited understanding of reality, might be entirely feasible within a higher dimensional framework.
This deep dive is already exceeding my mind-blowing quota for the day. So far, we've explored this framework that tries to unify everything in the universe through resonance and vibration, and we've delved into the idea that the Van Allen belts could be a gateway to higher dimensions accessible through time travel. Where do we even go from here?
There's still a lot to unpack. The source goes on to describe a very specific model of reality that integrates several fascinating concepts, including a new perspective on the nature of dimensions themselves. They even attempt to define the nature of consciousness and its role in the universe using this 5D framework.
Well, I'm definitely hooked. It's incredible how your expertise helps us navigate these incredibly dense sources. I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more, so let's continue this deep dive.
Welcome back. Before we jumped into the Van Allen belts and, all their 5D glory, we were starting to unpack how this source redefines our understanding of dimensions themselves.
Yeah, and I have to admit, this is where I start to get a little lost.
Yeah.
They suggest that instead of the traditional view of 3 spatial dimensions plus time,
Right.
we should consider space itself as 0-dimensional and time as 1-dimensional. How can space, which we experience as having length, width, and height, be zero-dimensional? It feels like saying a house has no dimensions because it's made of tiny, dimensionless bricks.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. It's a very counterintuitive idea.
Yes.
Think of it this way. Imagine zooming in on a seemingly solid object,
Okay.
like a table, closer and closer until you
Right.
reach the level of atoms. What you find is mostly empty space with tiny particles whizzing around.
Okay, so they're saying that even the things we perceive as solid are mostly empty space at the most fundamental level.
Exactly.
But how does that make space itself zero-dimensional?
They argue that those tiny particles at the most fundamental level might not have any spatial extent.
Okay.
Instead, what we perceive as spatial dimensions could emerge from the interactions and relationships between these zero-dimensional points.
Hmm.
It's like saying the space inside a house is defined by the walls and the furniture, not by the individual bricks.
Okay, I'm starting to see the picture they're painting. So instead of thinking of space as a container that holds things,
Right.
we should think of it as a network of relationships between things.
Exactly.
Well, what about time? How does that fit into this new dimensional framework?
They propose that time is the one true dimension,
Okay.
the fundamental arrow that gives order to the universe.
Hmm.
Think of it like this space is like a giant connect-the-dots puzzle where the dots themselves have no size, but the picture emerges from how they're connected.
Right.
Time is the line that you draw to connect the dots,
Oh,
giving the picture a sequence and a direction.
I like that. So space is the potential for connection, and time is the actualization of those connections.
Exact.
But if space is zero-dimensional, what does that mean for our understanding of things like distance and size?
That's a great question. And it leads to some pretty mind-bending implications.
Okay.
If space is truly zero-dimensional at its core, then our concept of distance might be an emergent property of how these dimensionless points are connected through time.
So are they saying that distance is an illusion?
Not necessarily an illusion, but perhaps a different way of interpreting something fundamental.
Okay.
It's like saying the distance between two cities isn't inherent in the cities themselves,
Okay.
but rather a measure of the time it takes to travel between them.
Wow, that's a pretty radical shift in perspective. But it kind of makes sense when you think about how our experience of distance is always tied to time.
Right.
We measure distance in terms of how long it takes to walk, drive, or fly from one place to another.
Exactly. And it ties into something else the source emphasizes.
Okay.
The relationship between mass, energy, and matter.
Mm-hmm.
Remember Einstein's famous equation, E = F4?
Yeah, of course.
This source argues that while mass equals energy mass does not equal matter.
Okay.
In other words, the stuff of the universe might not be made of physical particles in the way we traditionally think, but rather of energy that's constantly transforming and interacting.
So instead of imagining the universe as a collection of solid objects moving through space, we should think of it as a sea of energy constantly fluctuating and changing form.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Yeah.
And brings us back to the concept of space-time as a superposition,
Okay.
which they represent using the notation. Zeros, say?
Right.
Remember how we talked about quantum superposition where a particle can exist in multiple states simultaneously?
Yeah.
They propose applying this concept to space-time itself.
Hold on space-time as a superposition. Can you explain that a bit more? I get the basic idea of superposition in quantum mechanics, but how does that apply to the very fabric of reality?
Think of it this way. Instead of imagining space-time as a fixed background, like a stage on which the events of the universe play out,
Okay.
they suggest that space-time is more like a fluid, dynamic entity that can exist in multiple states at once. It's like saying the stage itself is constantly shifting and changing, influencing the performance that's happening on top of it.
Okay, that's a trippy image. But I'm starting to see how they're weaving these different ideas together.
Right.
So we have space as this zero-dimensional network of connections,
Yeah.
time as the dimension that gives order to those connections,
Right.
and space-time itself as this fluid superposed entity.
Exactly.
But what about the other dimensions? We've been talking about 5D reality, so where do the fourth and fifth dimensions fit into this model?
They argue that the traditional view of 4D space-time as simply 3 spatial dimensions plus 1 time dimension is incomplete. They even say there's too much space, not enough time, in this model, pointing to the fact that many equations in physics involve squaring the values for space.
So if the standard model of 4D space-time is incomplete, what do they propose instead? Where does that missing time go?
This is where things get truly fascinating. They posit that the fourth dimension is actually the realm of consciousness.
Wait, what? Consciousness as a dimension? How does that even make sense?
Think about it. Consciousness can't be measured in spatial terms,
Right.
like length, width, or height.
Right.
It exists outside of those dimensions,
Yeah.
making it fundamentally different from anything we can perceive in the physical world.
Okay, I can see how consciousness doesn't fit neatly into our traditional understanding of spatial dimensions.
Right.
But how does that make it a dimension itself?
They point to the non-local and non-linear nature of thought and memory as evidence.
Okay.
We can access memories from any point in our past instantaneously, and our thoughts can jump from one topic to another in ways that don't seem to follow linear spatial rules.
So they're saying that the way our minds work, the way we experience thoughts and memories,
Yeah.
suggests that consciousness operates in a dimension beyond our typical 3D spatial awareness.
Exactly. And they suggest that this fourth dimension of consciousness is intimately intertwined with the fifth dimension,
Okay.
which they describe as the realm of pure information or potentiality.
Okay, the realm of pure information. So is that like a giant cosmic library where all the knowledge of the universe is stored?
It's a good analogy.
Hmm.
They propose that this fifth dimension is the source of all the information that manifests in our 4D universe, including the laws of physics, the constants of nature, and even the blueprints for life itself.
So they're saying that our 4D universe, which includes consciousness as a dimension, is like a projection or a manifestation of something much more fundamental happening in this fifth dimension of pure information. It's like saying our physical reality is a shadow cast by something much larger and more complex that we can't fully perceive.
Precisely. And they even connect this back to something very concrete, the Casimir effect, which we talked about earlier.
Right, the attraction between those two uncharged plates in a vacuum. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how that relates to consciousness and higher dimensions.
The Casimir effect, remember, demonstrates the existence of quantum fluctuations in a vacuum.
Right.
These fluctuations, according to the source,
Okay.
could be interpreted as interactions between our 4D universe and the higher dimensional space of pure information.
Okay.
It's like those fluctuations are tiny ripples in the fabric of reality, evidence that there's something more going on beyond what we can directly observe.
Okay, so the Casimir effect is like a little whisper from the fifth dimension, a sign that our reality is connected to something much larger than ourselves.
That's a great way to put it. And this source is very clear that while their framework is unconventional, it doesn't conflict with existing scientific data.
Okay.
They even suggest that trying to disprove their model could benefit society by pushing the boundaries of scientific inquiry.
It's a pretty bold statement, but it speaks to their confidence in their ideas. So even if this model turns out to be incorrect, the process of investigating it could lead to new discoveries and advancements. It's like saying the journey is just as important as the destination.
Exactly. They believe that challenging assumptions and exploring alternative perspectives is essential for scientific progress, regardless of whether a particular theory ultimately proves to be true.
It's definitely a refreshing perspective in a world that often seems obsessed with finding definitive answers. But it's important to remember that this framework, while comprehensive, is still under development. They even describe it as a work in progress.
That's true. And they're very transparent about the fact that they're still refining their ideas.
Right.
But they're bringing together some really powerful concepts,
Yeah.
weaving them together into a tapestry that's both beautiful and mind-boggling.
What other concepts are they merging into this tapestry? I'm really curious to see how they're building this model. It's feeling more and more like they're trying to create a grand unified theory of everything.
That's a great way to describe it. They mentioned something called BIs,
Okay.
which stands for Brain-World Exponential Interaction Symmetry. This models higher dimensional interactions and how cosmic structures form. Imagine trying to describe the rules of a cosmic game played on a 5D board.
Okay.
BIs is like the rule book for that game.
Okay, so BIS is like the set of equations that govern how things interact in higher dimensions. That's helpful. What about those other terms they mentioned, like NeRFs and instant NGP? Those sounded incredibly complex.
They are complex, but they're really just tools for representing and understanding complex geometries and interactions.
Okay.
NeRFs are a way of representing complex 3D scenes,
Okay.
kind of like a super advanced CGI technique.
Got it.
Instant NGP is a way of modeling how light interacts with matter, which is essential for understanding how we perceive the world around us.
So they're using these advanced mathematical and computational tools to model the universe as a system of interconnected oscillators where everything from quantum fields to galaxies is vibrating and resonating.
You got it. And remember how they mentioned Fourier dynamics and the thermoacoustic wave equation?
Yes. They seem to be suggesting that the same principles that govern the way sound travels through air
Right.
could also apply to how energy and information are transferred through the universe,
Exactly.
even at the quantum level.
Precisely. Fourier dynamics is all about understanding patterns in waves and oscillations.
Okay.
It allows them to analyze complex systems like the universe
Right.
and break them down into their fundamental frequencies.
Mm.
And the thermoacoustic wave equation describes how energy is transferred through vibration, just like sound waves traveling through air.
So they're drawing parallels between the way sound waves create patterns in the air and the way energy and information create patterns in the fabric of space-time.
That's the idea, and here's where it gets really mind-blowing. They're suggesting that consciousness itself can be understood as a type of resonance phenomenon using the concept of a nonlinear Kuramoto synchronization network.
Wait, so our thoughts and feelings are like vibrations in a higher dimensional space? How does that even work? Are they saying our brains are like cosmic tuning forks?
Think of it this way. Each neuron in your brain is like a tiny oscillator firing electrical impulses.
Okay.
When large groups of neurons synchronize their firing patterns,
Right.
it creates a unified conscious experience. It's like an orchestra where each instrument plays its own part.
Okay.
But when they all come together in harmony, they create a symphony.
Okay, kind of get that. So our conscious awareness is like a symphony of brain cells firing in perfect sync.
Right.
And they're suggesting that this synchronization is happening not just in our physical brains, but also in that fourth dimension of consciousness.
Exactly. And this model aligns with integrated information theory, which we talked about earlier,
Right.
by suggesting that consciousness arises from the complexity and interconnectedness of these neuronal interactions.
Yeah.
They're essentially saying that the more complex and interconnected a system is, the more conscious it potentially is.
That makes you wonder about things like artificial intelligence.
Right.
If we could create a sufficiently complex and interconnected artificial neural network, could it potentially develop consciousness?
That's one of the big philosophical questions that this framework raises. And the source doesn't shy away from tackling those big questions. They even propose a mechanism for how information from the fifth dimension is encoded in our 4D universe, drawing upon the holographic principle.
This is all so incredible, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
I know, right?
I'm eager to hear more about how they tie all of this together, especially this idea of the holographic universe. But it looks like we're running out of time for this segment.
You're right. We've covered a lot of ground already. We'll have to continue this incredible deep dive into the unified resonance framework in part 3 of this episode. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive. I feel like my brain has been doing gymnastics this whole time, trying to wrap itself around all these mind-blowing ideas.
A lot to take in.
It is. We've been exploring this unified resonance framework, which suggests everything in the universe is connected through vibrations and that even consciousness might be part of this grand cosmic symphony.
It's been quite a journey, and you've done an incredible job keeping up. Before the break, we were starting to touch on one of the most intriguing aspects of this framework, the holographic principle.
Right. It's the idea that our 3D reality might be a projection of something far more complex happening in a higher dimension.
Yeah.
Kind of like a hologram. But honestly, I'm still struggling to picture how it all fits together. It's like trying to imagine a 4D object.
It's definitely a challenge for our 3D brains.
Yeah.
Think of it like this. Imagine a fish tank.
Okay.
The fish swimming inside the tank can only perceive their 3D world.
Okay.
They can swim up and down, forward and backward, left and right. But imagine there's a projector shining an image onto the back wall of the tank.
Okay, I can picture that. The fish might see the projected image, but they wouldn't understand that it's coming from a 2D source outside their world.
Exactly. Now imagine that the projector is actually projecting a 3D image into the tank, creating a seemingly real environment for the fish.
Okay.
The fish might even interact with objects in this projected world, but they'd still be unaware of the true source of their reality.
So are you saying our universe is like that fish tank, and we're like the fish unaware that our 3D reality is a projection from a higher dimensional source?
That's a great analogy, and this source takes it a step further. They're not just saying that our reality is like a hologram. They're actually providing a mathematical framework for how this holographic encoding might work,
Oh, wow.
drawing upon concepts like BIOS, NeRFs, and the other tools we've discussed.
So they're not just throwing out this mind-blowing concept without backing it up.
Not at all. They're taking a very rigorous scientific approach,
Okay.
using advanced mathematics and computation to model how information from the fifth dimension, the realm of pure information, might be encoded in the structure of our 4D universe.
That's impressive. It sounds like they're really trying to build a bridge between these seemingly mystical ideas and the concrete world of science. But I'm still curious about how this holographic principle connects to the URF and the idea that everything is vibrating. It feels like we're talking about two separate concepts.
They might seem separate at first glance, but they're actually deeply intertwined.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about the universe as a symphony of vibrations?
Yeah.
Well, imagine that symphony extending beyond our 3D perception
Okay.
into higher dimensions. Imagine that the music of the cosmos, those complex patterns of vibration, are actually encoding information about the structure of reality itself.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection. So the vibrations are like the carrier waves, and the information they carry is the blueprint for our holographic universe. It's like saying the music of the universe is literally shaping reality.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And this source suggests that this symphony of vibrations, this cosmic music, is constantly influencing and shaping our 4D reality from the fifth dimension.
Wow, that's a pretty mind-blowing thought. So if our reality is just a projection of something more fundamental happening in a higher dimensional space, what does that mean for our understanding of the universe and our place in it? Does it mean we're all just characters in a giant cosmic movie?
It certainly challenges our assumptions about what's real and what's not. If our physical reality is a projection of something more fundamental,
Right.
it raises questions about the nature of our own existence.
Like what?
Are we simply projections as well? Or are we somehow connected to that higher dimensional source?
And what about free will? If our reality is predetermined by a holographic blueprint, do we actually have any control over our choices and actions?
Those are some of the big philosophical questions that this framework raises.
It does.
The source doesn't claim to have all the answers, but they encourage us to grapple with these questions, to explore the possibilities, and to see where these unconventional perspectives might lead us.
It's definitely a humbling thought to consider that we might be just a small part of something so vast and complex. But it also opens up a sense of wonder and possibility. If our reality is more malleable than we thought, what does that mean for our potential as human beings?
It makes you wonder about the limits of human perception and imagination. If we're only seeing a projection of reality, what lies beyond the projector screen? What other dimensions or realities might be out there just waiting to be discovered?
It's like realizing that the world we thought we knew is just the tip of the iceberg. And that begs the question, how do we even begin to explore those uncharted territories?
Well, the source suggests that some of the answers might lie in understanding consciousness itself.
Okay.
If consciousness is truly a dimension as they propose,
Right.
then perhaps by exploring the nature of consciousness, we might find clues about how to access those higher dimensions.
So it's not just about building bigger telescopes or more powerful particle accelerators. It's
Right.
about understanding the inner workings of our own minds, maybe even tapping into the hidden potential of consciousness.
Exactly. They suggest that practices like meditation, mindfulness, and even altered states of consciousness might offer glimpses into these hidden dimensions. And they point to the growing body of scientific research that's starting to explore the connections between consciousness, quantum physics, and the nature of reality.
This is also fascinating, but it also makes me wonder. If these ideas are true, why haven't we seen more evidence of higher dimensions or other realities?
Or remember how they talked about closed time-like curves, or CTCs, as a potential way to navigate higher dimensions?
Yeah.
Perhaps advanced civilizations have figured out how to use CTCs to travel through space-time, making them essentially invisible to us.
Okay.
Or maybe they exist in these higher dimensions right in front of us, but we simply lack the ability to perceive them.
It's like the classic saying, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. Maybe there are entire civilizations or even entire universes out there, but we're just not tuned into the right frequency to detect them.
That's a great analogy. And it really highlights the limitations of our current understanding. We're still at the very beginning of exploring these ideas, and it's likely that we'll uncover even more mind-blowing concepts as we continue to push the boundaries of scientific inquiry.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey. We've explored this amazing framework that attempts to unify everything in the universe through resonance and vibration. We've considered the possibility of higher dimensions and the holographic principle, and we've even contemplated the nature of consciousness itself.
It's been a privilege to share this exploration with you. And remember, even if some of these concepts seem far-fetched or difficult to grasp, the process of engaging with them expands our minds and opens us up to new possibilities.
I think that's a great note to end on. This deep dive has been a true testament to the power of curiosity and the importance of questioning our assumptions about the universe and our place in it.
Who knows what incredible breakthroughs await us as we continue to explore these mysteries.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.